Good morning and welcome to this very important event that we're holding this morning at the Rainbow Towers. And of course, we're streaming live on Zim Paper's TV network platforms, of course, our Facebook page, Zim Paper's TV network. And of course, we're doing this ZTN in conjunction in partnership with the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development. Today, of course, is the launch of the 2021 pre-budget strategy paper, and of course we have gathered luminaries from industry and as well as government so that the Minister of Finance can introduce the document and as well explain briefly what it's all about. Blessing, this is an important event. I mean, the idea of consultation between all players in the economy is important in terms of driving the budgetary process forward and getting buy-in from all the different sectors.
Well, certainly, Andy, if you look, government has been talking about inclusive growth, and to get that, we have to have also an inclusive process in as far as coming up with the budget is concerned. As you might be aware, the Open Budget Survey also looks at how accessible this information is to the general public. And it's also important to note that today we also have many dignitaries following these proceedings online through our Zoom, and certainly looking forward to some of the key issues that will be coming out, what government is prioritizing going forward, especially as we come out of the TSP and going into the next two phases of development. I
mean, government has been recognized, the Zimbabwe government has been recognized, of course, of being more transparent in terms of the budgeting process. And in fact, international organizations have recognized the efforts that we have made in terms of consultation, in terms of more being transparent and open.
I think in Southern Africa.
Third in Southern Africa. And that's obviously a very positive move, not for us, but not just for the country, but also the economic growth of the nation.
Most definitely, Andy. And the issue of economic growth that you're talking about, it will be interesting. The GDP, the contraction that was, anticipated minus 4.4. It will be interesting to see what we're targeting as a nation, and also going forward, if we're positive about the whole figures.
Well, I think let's get the show started and let's hear from the speakers. So I'll see you later. Blessing.
Definitely.
My pleasure to, of course, be hosting this very important event in Zimbabwe's budgeting calendar. And of course, today, the Minister of Finance, together with his team, is launching the 2021 pre-budget strategy paper. And of course, we're here live at Rainbow Towers, and we're streaming live on ZTN platforms. Of course, that is at Zim Paper's TV network on Facebook page and YouTube under ZTN. I'd like to welcome everybody here. Let me first start off by obviously welcoming the Honorable Minister of Finance and Economic Development, Professor Ntuli Ncube. I'd also like to acknowledge a few of our guests in attendance today. I'll start off, of course, with Dr. Sibanda, Chief Secretary of the President, in absentia. He sends his apologies, but the Deputy Chief Secretary, Dr. Vishwaya, is here. And also senior government officials, permanent secretaries from most of the various ministries in government. Also captains of industry, notably CZI, ZNCC, Bankers Association, Chamber of Mines, Zimbabwe Farmers Union, Insurance and Pensions Commission, amongst many others, and of course all of you joining us via the Zoom platform, as this is a virtual meeting. I'd also like to acknowledge the Governor of the Central Bank. I'm not sure he's here yet, but I know his deputy, Dr. Malambo, is here, and also his officials. We'd like to welcome them, and the Director General of ZimStat. So I think with that, all protocols are observed. So as I said, it's the launch of the 2021 pre-budget strategy paper. It's entitled Building Resilience and Economic Recovery Post-COVID-19. Now I'm going to start off, and I don't want to steal the Minister's thunder, but I think what's important is that under the new dispensation in Zimbabwe, the strategy has been wider consultations so that more input is given into the budget process. And by that definition, it means more buy-in, more players. They understand where the budget is going and be able to then help government as well as private sector and individuals achieve the budget's objectives. Now, having said that, we'd like to get straight into our program. So I'd like to invite to come up and give the opening remarks Mr. George Givamatanga. He's Secretary for Finance and Economic Development. George, thank you.
Good morning. Honorable Minister of Finance and Economic Development, Professor Ntuli Ngube. I would also want to acknowledge the Deputy Chief Secretary to the President Cabinet, Dr. Martin Rushwaya, colleagues, secretaries, and the other senior government officials. Also colleagues from business, as already mentioned by the Director of Ceremonies, and more importantly, colleagues from the media. Welcome to this launch of the pre-budget strategy paper under the theme Building Resilience and Economic Recovery Post-COVID-19. The government is launching the 2021 budget strategy paper in line with the new dispensation's commitment of ensuring broader stakeholder involvement in policy formulation processes, that way generating effective public participation in policy and programs implementation. Accordingly, the 2021 budget strategy paper constitutes a valuable tool meant to guide consultative discussions and sharing of ideas on national priority policies, programs, and projects for the forthcoming 2021 national budget. Under the theme, Building Resilience and Economic Recovery Post-COVID-19, the budget strategy paper focuses on strengthening the economy to withstand any potential climatic, which is drought, cyclones, floods, pests, and macroeconomic shocks, as we focus on attaining inclusive and sustainable growth towards Vision 2030. The targeted constituents include the tripartite negotiating forum partners comprising government, business, and labor, as well as parliamentarians, private sector players, civic society organizations, academia, and all other interested parties, individuals, inclusive of cooperating developmental partners. A broader consultative process is particularly important at this juncture for strengthening policies and other interventions in a view of multifaceted nature of challenges, such as macroeconomic and climatic shocks in forms of recurring droughts and other natural disasters. Prevailing humanitarian tragedy in form of the COVID-19 pandemic, which all disrupt livelihoods and the economy at large. This therefore requires redefinition of the country's priorities and focus, paying particular attention to reducing poverty, promoting equitable shared growth, and resuscitating distressed sectors of the economy, strengthening social services delivery systems, and establishing resilient and inclusive safety nets to protect the vulnerable members of the society. In addition, the 2021 budget strategy paper marks the transition from the Transitional Stabilization Program coming to an end in December 2020, paving way for the longer-term National Development Strategy 2021 to 2025 as the country ascends towards Vision 2030 for attaining a middle-income status economy. Hence, the 2021 BSP focuses on the broader agenda of consolidating gains made under the Transitional Stabilization Program and pushing necessary reforms and programs under the National Development Strategy. Finally, in contextualizing the 2021 BSP, a scan of the global and domestic economic development and outlook stands valuable in guiding assumptions and macroeconomic and physical projections together with the respective 2021 policy thrust and priorities in line with the NDS. Thank you.
Mr. George Kimamatanga, Permanent Secretary for Finance and Economic Development, thank you very much. It's now my honor to introduce the keynote address by the Honorable Minister, Zimbabwe's Honorable Minister of Finance and Economic Development, Professor Ntuli Ncube. Minister.
The Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development, George Tongesai Kuvamatanga. I think I've only learned about that name today, so that's why I had to say it. The Deputy Secretary, Chief Secretary in the Office of the President and Cabinet, Dr. Martin Rushwaya, and other Permanent Secretaries here present, the moderator, Andy Hodges, all colleagues and all protocols observed, good morning. Colleagues, the theme of this pre-budget strategy paper, which will obviously find its way into the budget itself, is building resilience and economic recovery post-COVID-19. Building resilience is significant because it's resilience against shocks, be they climate shocks, be they the disease shocks that are upon us. We need to build that resilience, and the budget is going to respond or ought to respond to that. We're talking about economic recovery. The economic recovery has to be inclusive. It should not leave anyone behind, both in terms of income distribution, but as well as spatial distribution of opportunity. As we do this, we have to be cognizant of what's happening around us in terms of the economy. So let me give a snapshot of what is in the pre-budget strategy paper that we ought to recognize as we do our consultations, as we use the document as a tool for the budget consultation process. The global economy is still reeling under the impact of the COVID-19 crisis, but from the latest IMF global focus revisions in the last few days, we see that countries like the United States are doing slightly better than expected in 2020, and every economy is expected to recover in 2021. What we see is that the global economy overall is expected to grow at minus 4.4% in 2020, with recovery to about 5.2%, plus 5.2% in 2021. Of course, within that, the most affected countries are the developed economies, although they're doing slightly better for some of the, especially the United States. And the emerging markets and developing economies have been less impacted. Only I see a growth of minus 5.8% for the advanced economies, and then minus 3.3% for the developing and emerging markets. Of course, some countries have been hard hit, such as the UK at minus 9.8%, Italy minus 10.6%, Spain 12.8%. These are very large negative numbers, and these economies have been hit hard by the pandemic. Now, coming closer home, or maybe before I come closer home, just a few comments about China. That our expectation this year is that China, among the large economies, is going to be the best performer with a growth of 1.9%, plus 1.9%. And in a sense, that is holding up growth for the rest of the world because of its large size and also its control of the global supply chain as we know it. Latin America is also not faring very well, especially Brazil and Mexico, with growth rates that are higher than, or rather, in absolute terms, larger than minus 8%. In fact, minus 8.1% for the whole Latin American region is what is expected. Coming closer home, Sub-Saharan Africa, we expect an average growth rate of minus 3% this year, 2020, but in the recovery to plus 3.1% in 2021. So we expect basically a V-type shape in terms of the growth projection, a dip in 2020, and then a recovery in the year 2021. That's the context in which we find ourselves as Zimbabwe. That's the state of our trading partners, our source of investments, and our source of trade activity. And looking at global trade itself, we're expecting a growth of minus 10.4% in 2020, and a recovery to plus 8.3% in 2021. So global trade, being one of the channels of growth, has been impacted adversely by COVID-19. Commodity prices, of course, there's been a mild dip. Overall, it's a dip, not a substantial dip, but we expect recovery again in 2021 across all major commodities. Of course, we celebrate the performance of gold. In fact, as long as there is uncertainty in the world, buy gold. Don't think, just buy gold. That's the investment mantra. Is an investment protector, so you expect the prices to remain buoyant as long as there is uncertainty. Now, of course, the risks to the recovery to the world in 2021, as I've outlined, it still remain. As I said, COVID-19 itself, its resurgence could be problematic for the rest of the world, but also the trade tensions and technology tensions that still remain between the large economies, United States, China, have the potential to impact growth in the world. I think one thing you should keep track of, those of you who are analysts, is Kekiang index, which is an index that was created by the former Prime Minister of China, which tracks activity, for the Chinese economy. But it's a good indicator of where the world is headed, because that represents global demand, control of the global supply chain, and so forth. So take a look at that, see where that is headed. It will tell you a lot as where the economy is headed. And also take a look at the Baltic Index, for which measures shipping activity. One way to track where the global economy is headed is watch the ships. Once you see the volume of ships in the seas begin to drop, then you know that there is trouble. So let's watch that. For now, for 2020, it's not looking good, but 2021, we expect things to improve. For oil, again, you should watch the number of oil rigs on whether it's the US offshore or wherever, but count the number of oil rigs. They will tell you a lot about what's going to happen and what's happening in that sector. Now, switching to the domestic economy, our own economy, we still see negative growth this year, but I must say that our teams are busy. The Treasury Research Team, Zimstats, and the RBZ Reserve Bank team are working together to take a closer look at our GDP growth forecast expectations for 2020 and 2021. But for now, we're still officially holding the minus 4.5% rate of growth for 2020, and we expect a recovery to plus 7.4% in 2021. Also because we're coming from a low base. If you go through negative growth rates for 2 years in succession, and then there's recovery overall in terms of climate change, absence of shocks, the global economy turning for the better, you expect a very sharp rebound, if not because it's a statistical phenomenon, but also because it's real in the first place. So again, we expect a V-shape in the growth trajectory for the economy. Of course, in the BSP, we recognize that, the TSP is the bedrock of everything. Over the last 2 years, we've been operating under the Transitional Stabilization Program. It has created a base. I must say, I'm very proud of the performance of government overall, of Treasury, all the departments in terms of implementation of the TSP. We have ticked all the boxes. I went through all the boxes. We have ticked all of them in terms of progress. So we recognize that this in the BSP, and because that's the bedrock, that's the foundation from which we are building. I don't want to go over what we've done under the TSP. I presented that 2 weeks ago. Maybe it was a different audience, but I still did, which needed to recognize that we've eliminated the twin deficits. Fiscal deficit is gone, and deficits are gone, as well as the current account deficits are also gone. In fact, I think we're at record levels in terms of our current account surpluses, where exports far exceed imports. And this year, again, we're expecting that surplus to about $1.2 billion US, if not higher. And the remittances remain very strong, and they're up 33%, and the year is not even over. So the twin deficits are done. We've reintroduced monetary policy, as you know, as a tool. Monetary policy committee is working, and most of all, we've introduced our currency, so a full moon in monetary policy, and the currency is stable, and that has managed to stabilize prices as well, and we have to keep it like that for a while. So that's one. Looking at other areas, we've responded to the COVID pandemic as we should. From that capacity we've created, we've continued to invest in infrastructure. Whether looking at roads, hospital infrastructure, we've done that. Social services, supporting the health sector, we've done that, as well as social protection. And then the education sector has moved from a simpler education model to a production-oriented education model. That has been supported under the TSP. A lot of governance reforms in terms of aligning laws to the Constitution, and we've improved in our rankings for doing business. Last year, we were ranked among the top 20 performers globally. I do have a summary in the BSP of all the areas where we've made progress under the TSP. It's been a very successful journey. Not been easy, but reforms are never easy. And sometimes people say, oh, Minister, this is policy inconsistency. No, it's not. It's called reforms. When you reform, you change things. When you change things, we are not being policy inconsistent. We are changing things for the better. As you can imagine, like any budget preparation process, we have a macroeconomic framework, a macro-fiscal framework for the next 3 years, because we're just not budgeting for 2021 and it ends there. We have to take a 3-year view of things. So we've got a macroeconomic framework up to year 2021. Maybe to give you a highlight, obviously I said for next year we expect a GDP growth of plus 7.4%. In year 2022, growth of plus 5.5%. Year 2023, growth of 5.2%. And we really want to maintain a growth rate average of 5% until year 2030. If we do that, we will reach upper middle income status for sure. Surely we can achieve a growth rate of averaging 5% per annum. Absolutely. There's no reason why we should fail to do that. It's doable. Other countries in Africa are doing that or even better. That will really make sure we can get to that minimum $4,000 US dollars per capita, per person in year 2030, and that's upper middle income status that is pronounced or enunciated in Vision 2030. And again, we were determined that in terms of government balances, fiscal balances, we want our deficit to remain below the 3% target, 3% as a percentage of GDP target that SADC has said all countries ought to adhere to. So we are firmly within that target in terms of our plans, and we expect inflation to collapse dramatically to single digit as we do this. Of course, I mean, there are risks of COVID, resurgence, and so forth, but I think we ought to congratulate ourselves as a country for how well we've done in managing the COVID pandemic. The initial lockdowns, the curfews, the social distancing that you've all been practicing, wearing your masks and all of that, all those prevention measures have been very, very impactful and in managing the returnees and so forth. They've been very impactful in containing the pandemic, and I think we ought to congratulate ourselves. I think initially we're targeted to have cases of the orders of 70,000 and above. You recall those figures at the beginning? But we ended up, just about 8,000 now, just below 10,000. So that's a remarkable achievement indeed. Now, I now want to turn to the drivers of our or rather the assumptions for this kind of growth that we expect to be in place in 2021. As I said earlier, we expect better rains. Also, we expect us to be able to contain the COVID-19 pandemic. We are expecting to successfully domesticate our value chains, which is another phrase for import substitution. But I prefer that phrase because really these days you don't target producing a product, you target producing a part of a product in terms of the value chains contribution to the final product. So really, I think a big part of what we expect is a better agricultural season. That's always a game changer in terms of our growth focus, and the absence of shocks, of course. But those you never know. They're black swan events. They can happen anytime, and we pray that we don't get any of those. So coming to the pillars of the strategy, the pillars are, again, based on the National Development Strategy pillars. We have an NDS, which is a successor to the TSP, then there'll be NDS 2 to take us to 2030 and Vision 2030. So basically the pillars of the BSP are as follows. One, we inclusive growth and macro stability. That's very important. Two, we want to develop and support productive value chains and domesticate the value chains. Three, we want to optimize value for our natural resources. Four, we want to invest in infrastructure, in ICT infrastructure, and the digital economy. Five, we want to invest in human capital and well-being and health. And then six, we want to build effective institutions, promote governance and peace. We want to continue with a re-engagement agenda, an engagement agenda, including engaging our own diaspora. So 7 pillars drive this pre-budget strategy. If I can say more on inclusive growth and macro stability, this is self-explanatory in a way. We want to continue on our path of prudent fiscal management and shying away from large deficits. We want to continue with strengthening, fine-tuning our monetary policy, monetary stability, and currency stability. Again, we want to make sure that we continue to manage our external imbalances in the form of the current account deficits. If we can keep a surplus for a while, that would be preferred. We want to strengthen our financial sector, reduce any possibilities of money laundering, and really try to clean up the payment system so that it is not used for abusive practices, because there are money laundering considerations to worry about, anti-money laundering considerations to worry about. So we want to strengthen that. That's what we desire to do, and the budget will speak to that in its orientation. The second pillar, I say deepening and supporting productive value chains. Here there are 2 critical areas. One is agriculture, the other is manufacturing. That we have an agricultural recovery plan which focuses on investing in irrigation, investing in traditional grains to climate-proof our agriculture. We also have ongoing programs about supporting the vulnerable, which is the Funvuza Presidential Input Program, as well as the commercial Smart Command Agriculture Program, which we do together jointly with the banks as a PPP, a public-private partnership. We want to keep supporting those. But what's critical in all of that is that we must climate-proof our agriculture. That's what we mean by building resilience to the shock of climate change. And also to focus on alternative technologies, drip irrigation, for example, even the debate around GMOs, genetically modified organisms, and then promote our traditional grains. A good part of our country is dry, in the Zarabrani area, some areas in Matmat North, Mat South, Masingo area. We've got some dry parts of the country in terms of the quantum of rainfall. Want to promote the planting, the growing of traditional grains in these areas. Also want to support the horticulture recovery plan so that, again, we can get back to where we were in terms of exportation of flowers, the macadamia nuts, of avocados and so forth. We want to be able to support that and really try to domesticate value chains thereof. And then on manufacturing, we want to make sure we implement the national industrialization strategy, which again is very clear around domesticating value chains and make sure that the sector is able to link smartly with other sectors in terms of backward and forward linkages, especially agriculture, but indeed other sectors as well. And as we think about that, the issue of job creation becomes critical. So I think I want to propose that we carry on with the YETI program, the Youth Employment Tax Incentive Rebate Program, but also just focus on creating more jobs, especially for the youth. We're a youthful country, like most African countries. Women ought to be supported. So indeed, the National Venture Fund that we launched will continue. We want to capacitate that again and continue to make more investment. We've made some investments already, but now we want to really focus on startups by the youth, working jointly with the Ministry of Youth, Ministry responsible for youth, and supports of the arts, the sports, recreation. All those are critical factors that impact our youth. Pillar 3 is optimizing value of natural resources. Here we're focusing on the mining sector, 1, and then the tourism sector, number 2. The mining sector needs a lot of support. Rather, the mining ministry needs a lot of support in capacity in terms of exploration, capacity in terms of monitoring, in terms of processing applications. A lot of you like to be in the mining sector. I won't tell you the figure in terms of number of applications per month, but it's a lot of applications to do mining, and they ought to be, as a ministry, they ought to have capacity to process those applications and support you, but also to then monitor the industry as we go along. That's the only way we can get to our $12 billion industry by year 2023. We'll support the ministry in every which way. There's a cadastral system that needs to be in place, environmental sustainability support. We'll do all of that. Let me end up by saying that they just need again to continue fine-tuning the fiscal regime for the mining sector so that our tax system is able to collect as much as possible from the sector, but also be able to give incentives, the right targeted incentives where needed for us to raise revenue into the future anyway. So that's critical. For the tourism sector, we have a tourism recovery strategy. We've done a lot in supporting it in terms of the 18 billion recovery strategy, whether it's, I hope you're all enjoying now the 17% rebate on VAT for your tourism expenses across various tourism resorts that you've been visiting. I hope you found time to do that. That's critical. So we want to start with domestic tourism, then regional tourism, marketing, then finally international tourism as we reopen the sector. And the international airlines are now flying in. Slowly but surely we're opening up the sector. So we'll support that sector in the budget, and we ought to. This is low-hanging fruit. It's the best creator of jobs. If you want quick jobs to be created in any country, tourism sector is often the best way to do it if you have such opportunities within a country. Then on infrastructure, again, at risk of repeating, we want to continue with our road construction. For instance, if we take the Harare-Beitbridge Road, we ought to complete that part of it and then start in earnest in 2021 on the Harare-Chirundu portion so that the whole road is completed over the next 2 years. And we want to be able to use our own resources to do that. The healthy competition that we've created among contractors, all domestic contractors, on this first part, on the Harare-Beitbridge, has been fantastic. They're competing, they're doing a good job, and I think we're getting value for money. And they're all getting paid in Zimbabwe dollars, not in hard currency. That makes a big difference if we compare that to external contractors. The digital economy is critical. I didn't know I could attend the World Bank IMF annual meeting digitally, but I've been on it the whole week. It's incredible, and sometimes you wonder why we ever traveled, but just shows you that COVID has its upsides. And the biggest beneficiary is the ICT sector, is the digital economy. So again, our budget ought to show that this is the future. It is also a way to build resilience in the way we do business, in the way we interact with each other. It's giving us the resilience that is needed for us to continue functioning. So we should support it. Then there's the digitalization project. Again, a digital migration project. We will support this in the budget to make sure that we get back onto it, where 2 years ago we had big plans for it, but then things slowed down, but we want to pick that up again in the 2021 budget. The other area around infrastructure is housing. You know, if a country wants to build a middle class, if it wants to sustainably move into a middle class status and stay there, you support housing ownership. Because that's how this is done. That at the end of the day, a household balance sheet is often determined by the housing ownership. If you own a house, you've paid it off, that's your balance sheet. That's what determines your wealth. It's a way to save. It's a way to also deal with intergenerational equity. So housing is very critical, and the budget ought to support that. We're already already have agreed that we should capacitate the National Housing Fund and the National Housing Guarantee Fund. We'll make sure that we walk the talk in the budget and give it very good resources. But also the whole idea of urban renewal. You know, a good part of GDP of any country comes from the cities. They are the sources of demand, sources of technology, sources of skills, sources of connectivity with the global economy. That's what a city does. That's what agglomeration does. But of course, we have the mining sector, we have the agricultural sector. But we also know that the mining sector can also result in the creation of towns, and those cities then take on a new life. So supporting urban renewal is critical for us achieving our 2030 objectives. The small airports, we don't forget the small airports. We've got the big ones. Small airports, most of them under DDF, also ought to be renovated. But also there are some not so small ones, such as Buffalo Range. I was there last Christmas. It needs to be dealt with. It needs to be renovated. And then the Kariba Airport, the same. And then the airport in Mutare. And then also the airport in Guero. I'm just picking these semi-small, but not so small airports. They need to be upgraded. We may not do everything in 1 year, by the way, but we will start the multi-year program. On water and sanitation, again, we need more borehole drilling in our dry rural areas. So clearly within our infrastructure pillar, we'll do more of that. Capacity Zinwa with the big drills that can go down 1.5 kilometers and drill and get water down there. But also key dams. We've been doing the rounds as Treasury, myself leading the way, trying to find out what the key kind of emotional infrastructure projects are, province by province. I know them all. When I have time, I'll take you through all of them, province by province. We know what the emotional projects are. The projects that if we do those projects as a government, it really touch the lives of people. They will feel that in a spatial sense, they have not been left behind, that there's been inclusive growth. They too have been included in our growth trajectory. So key dams will be dealt with. You know, let me tell you a little bit about Mzarabane. You see, the people of Mzarabane literally live on the escarpment. So when there's heavy rains, you have gullies that are created and it is flooded. But half the time the place is dry until you have a lot of rain. And the problem is Mavuradona Mountains, if you know the geography of that area. So the water literally rushes down onto the people on the flat part of the ground, which is where they are, that's where they grow. So the solution is we build a dam, Mavuradona Dam, to capture the water. As it comes down, it will solve that problem in Zarabane permanently, if you ask me. It's a very interesting place. And when there is rain in that place, children can't get to school. There are places in Zarabane where children only get to school on the 1st of April every year. For the first 3 months, they can't because of the water. And it's nothing to do with the Minister of Education. It's got to do with our infrastructure pipelining in response to those community needs as dictated by the physical environment in those areas. So that's the kind of research we're beginning to do now on the ground, understanding areas, understanding people's needs. That's what this budget should be about. Then let me turn to effective institutions and building, which is the last area. You know, if you don't have peace in a country, you can't invest, you can't move around easily, feel safe. It's terrible for doing business. So peace is very important. So capacitation of our law enforcement agencies is critical, whether it's Ministry of Defense, the Army, the police, whoever, is very, very important. So we want to make sure that the budget is able to resource them adequately. They need cantonment. You don't want your military to be living among civilians, and it's the norm. It cannot work like that. They have to be properly cantoned in their own areas. So we'll continue to do what we've done in areas such as Tsiresekwa and so forth, to make sure that the cantonment aspects are dealt with, both for the police and the army and other sections of the law enforcement cluster. They need to be mobile. You know, you have a small issue in your house, and then you call the police and they have no vehicles to get to you. You have to offer transport yourself as the victim. Surely that ought to be a thing of the past. So again, we want to accelerate the capacity, the mobility capacity of our police going forward. It's very critical. We want to deal with corruption, make sure that the agencies that handle corruption are adequately capacitated, whether it's ZAC, whether it's the police themselves, National Prosecuting Authority. That's all critical. We want to remain true to property rights. We have done this global compensation agreement with the farmers as an example, but generally we want to be adhere to property rights like everyone else. We want to align our various laws to the Constitution. We've done very well so far. We want to carry on doing what we're doing. And when it comes to state enterprises, again, we want to make sure we continue to reform. Currently, we've been mulling over issues around even the ownership structure, partial privatization and so forth. But we've made progress under the TSP in terms of liquidating those that ought to be liquidated, in terms of departmentalizing those that ought to be departmentalized. We've done that very, very quickly. In fact, in the first half of the 2-year period, we were able to do that. Where we've been slightly slower is the actual partial privatizations. Those take time, but we're well on our way again on that one. And in fact, for all the SOEs, we are at a stage where we've got, transaction advisors. They've been engaged, and they're beginning to mull over inviting investors into taking equity. We want to capacitate ZIDA in terms of environment for doing business. And also, we've identified 16 areas where we are going to be improving. We ought to improve over the next 2 years as a government in terms of the ease of doing business rankings. Every ministry has an area that they're focusing on, and they are focused on it, and they report to Cabinet from time to time on progress in that area. Then finally, on re-engagement and engagement, again, we want to continue to engage, and we've had some successes. CBZ sanctions or potential restrictions on them have been lifted. Same thing applies to Agribank, to IDBZ. ZB was, the sanctions were lifted back in 2017. We are making progress, even in terms of these restrictions on our financial institutions, targeted sanctions, because there's a long way to go to complete that list in terms of targeted individuals as well. In terms of arrears clearance, we have been making token payments on our arrears. We slowed that down because of COVID and so forth. We'll resume, and then we'll resume again our negotiations with our creditors as we go forward, so that we can eventually clear our arrears. We have a roadmap for arrears clearance, and we are following it to the T. And then I must say, finally, on the diaspora engagement, we want to engage our diaspora for skills, for their resources, and also for their networks. So we'll sharpen our diaspora engagement policy and strategy so that we can benefit from our citizens out there. In fact, it turns out that 48% of the diaspora are in South Africa, very close, across the border. And then we've got another, 16.7% in the UK, then another 7.4% in the United States, and then 5.3% in Australia. So we know where they are. and we can organize and make sure that they can work with us, support their country, support themselves and their families as well. After all, it's their country. So, colleagues, here we are. Finally, I hereby launch the pre-budget strategy paper for the 2021 budget under the theme Building Resilience and Economic Recovery Post-COVID-19. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I think another hand for the Honourable Minister, Professor Ngube. Just to recap, for those of you who are joining us online, of course, we're streaming live on Zim Papers TV network ZTN platform, so you can watch this live, of course, on our Facebook page, Zim Papers TV network, or on YouTube at ZTN. And also, of course, there is a Zoom link. So those of you who are on Zoom or you are watching us on our social media platforms, please can you put your questions, whether in the chat or in the messenger, and we'll obviously try and ask the Minister those questions, because now we get to the point whereby we can ask the Minister some questions directly from business leaders, individuals, and even possibly from government if they want to question the Minister on seeing whether their allocation will be increased for the 2021 budget. Of course, you're watching the launch of the 2021 pre-budget strategy paper here at Rainbow Towers by the Minister of Finance and Economic Development, Professor Ntuli Ngube. So I think what we'll do in this session now is that we'll ask, I think we'll get 3 questions, Minister, for the Minister to answer. So I do have some questions that have come through, 3 questions, and I will open it up to the room, and we can then ask the Minister, and also, of course, on the Zoom and social media platforms. So, Minister, the first question that came through is your predictions for growth. You said GDP growth for 2021, 7.4%, driven mainly by 0.8%. However, sub-Saharan Africa growth rate is on average around 3.3%. And it's important that the fundamentals of the budget in terms of forecasting are correct. Otherwise, of course, it can throw out the entire budgeting process and the numbers. So I think the question is, why are you so optimistic of the 7.4% growth, and what do you think will be driven? And it appears that Zimbabwe will be one of the largest growth countries in sub-Saharan Africa. The second question, Minister, is looking at the sectors. You looked at agriculture and mining growth of 11%. And obviously, you also made a comment that there could be a danger that there's softening of mineral prices. Mineral prices may be a bit soft, and whether that will have an impact. The question is, will it have an impact on mining and also the other drivers that you put? Manufacturing, you're expecting 6.4% GDP growth in 2021, and electricity and water at 18.8%. So that's the second question. And the third question, of course, is your plans in terms of reining in government expenditure, maintaining a balanced budget, and, of course, enhancing revenue collection. Minister?
I can speak from here?
You want?
Oh, I have to come back there. Yeah, sure. Okay. Just that. Let me hold this, otherwise I'll lose the page. Thank you. The first question pertains to our growth forecast for 2021 of plus 7.4%. And the question is, are there any risks to this forecast? And haven't we underestimated the risks? The answer is no, because you see, as Zimbabwe, we are coming from a very unique position, which is 2 successive years of negative growth. So that's what you call a low base in statistics. So we've got 2 effects. One is real recovery, and the other is the statistical effect. So the 2 together is what is giving us the 7.4% rate of growth. We're just coming from a very low base, but also we have recovery in activity. Of course, there are assumptions that we've made around climate change that we think that God will smile on us. So far, so good in terms of rainfall levels this year, and that we won't be as impacted by COVID. We've found a way to live with it, and our economy is beginning to wake up again, it's beginning to tick again. So we've made those assumptions. If you look at the other economies, because I think there was an attempt to juxtapose that growth with the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa, ours is higher, it's only because we're in this unique position of having had 2 years of negative economic growth. Then coming to agriculture, mining, and whether this, again, the growth rates here are too optimistic, 11% for the other, 10% for the other, including manufacturing. But again, this is a rainfall-driven focus. So if you really want to get that right, just focus the rainfall pattern properly. Before Christmas, so that we know when people ought to plant, or after Christmas. If we get that right, we are good in terms of agriculture. And our support for the sector also has been very timely. We've looked at the Fumvudza system, for example, for households, farmers out there. 1.2 million are ready, and we are distributing the inputs on time, fertilizers, seeds, and everything on time. And the agricultural extension services, mobile now, we've got 1,000 motorbikes. They will receive another 4,000 over the next few months. So we're doing everything we can to make sure that on the input front we are intervening appropriately along the value chain. So I'm confident that as long as the rains are good, the agriculture will do very well. On the mining sector, I'm most confident on the gold sector, because again, the biggest risk to the global economy is COVID. So as long as we have resurgence globally, buy gold, as I said, and that's good for us, because that's our biggest export. It's our, in terms of output. But also, I think as long as China recovers, even by, we're seeing a nice growth for China for 2021 coming through, again, we know that we will get good tobacco prices on the agricultural sector. Of course, this year, we got better prices because Brazil wasn't in the room. They had more difficulties in marketing their tobacco compared to us. We benefited from the distributed system for buying our tobacco, so that worked very well as opposed to a centralized system. So again, we expect as long as China is doing well, we should be okay on that. Those are our major exports. The same applies to cotton. So I could go through all of them, and I think that really, in terms of commodity prices, we will do okay. Was there a third question?
Balanced budget, inflation. Balanced budget, living within means.
Whether we're able to achieve
reducing, maintaining expenditure.
Yeah, that's right. I jotted it down, but it came out funny in my handwriting here. Yes, we should be able to do that. We have now really mastered the art of living within our means. If we can do it under COVID, under a drought, surely, if we have now learned to live with COVID, and also drought is not there, which because we expect good rains, we'll even do better. But also we'll do even better if inflation slows down, because that's your biggest problem. That forces us to do 2 budgets a year, including supplementary budgets. So already we've seen that for 2020, we didn't have to do a supplementary budget. Also because we had just spent below, we only spent 42% for our budget mid-year, so we didn't need to do a supplementary budget. So we were able to live within our means very easily. We've managed to do all the necessary wage adjustments. If you look at wage expenditure as a percentage of revenues, that's 50% now, less than 50%, which means that we're able to spend at least 50% of our revenues on real investment, which is what will drive economic growth going forward and take us to upper middle income status. So we have understood the art of budgeting. We won't have any difficulty with that. But also, because inflation has slowed down and the currency has stabilized, again, currency stability is critical to budgeting, because once your currency moves, prices change, your budget is out of line. So currency stability, inflation decline are also part of the equation when we're thinking about living within our means. We will be able to do that quite easily. Trust me. Thank you.
I think if I can ask the ministers to stay there, because we'll take some questions from the audience. Is there anyone in the room who would like to ask a question? I see some economists there, so come on, let's get a question from you.
Thank you for the opportunity, MC. My name is Tendai Chinamaso, I'm an economist. I just want to give a compliment rather than a question. I know he's expecting questions, but it's also important to give compliments where credit is due. I just want to thank the Minister, your ministry and government for a successful transition of the stabilization program, which just ended. You've achieved a lot, and we expect more from the national recovery strategy. I also want to say on the agriculture, you've invested a lot in Vuvu's project. Basically what it means, anyone who has land, agricultural land, will get support. That's very important for the upcoming season. So keep up the good work, and thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's some compliments there, Minister. And in fact, I'm now reading a post from Willings Virevo on the Zoom chat. Mine is just a comment to congratulate the Minister and team and the government. We really see green shoots quite visible, indeed off a low base. However, the man on the street is yet to really feel the impact. My suggestion is to expedite the Commission of Inquiry recommendations on pension and insurance, as that will really have a major impact on calming down nerves and will begin to generate acceptance of the reforms by the general public that lost their savings over the past. You can comment on that. We also have another question. The question, of course, is about job creation. I think in the 2020 budget as well, Minister, you spoke about job creation, and again, in the 2021 budget, it seems to be a priority. So I think the question is the linkage between job creation and increased productivity, and how the budget will put in place the building blocks for Zimbabwe to increase productivity, particularly in sectors that we can generate exports in, and even local production. You talked about local value chains. I think we can take one more question if there's any question in the room. Oh, here we go. This is from Kanyeze from the Zoom. Thank you for your question, Minister. In the 2020 budget strategy paper, the Minister was worried about the extent of resource leakages, in particularly gold through South Africa. What is the current situation, and how will you manage it going forward? That's your three questions, Minister.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andy. Let me thank everyone for their contributions. Tendai, thank you for the compliments. We've really worked hard in meeting the goals of the TSP. It's also that there's just so many achievements. Sometimes I think we're unable to communicate because it's just so much. We've touched every part of that TSP and make sure that we make progress, and we've made very good progress indeed. It's a very solid base for us to move forward. And we are right that for agriculture, again, we want to make sure that those with access to land are supported. We don't want to import. I'm fed up of importing grain, wheat, maize. The land is there, the water is there, but what's missing is irrigation and good farmers. So please support your government, support yourselves, support us and everyone. Let's focus on agriculture and get that right. We as government stand ready to support you. Thanks for that. And Zurevo, thank you for the again congratulatory remarks. That's how you say it. And but again, you did mention that we should always strive as a government to make sure that the man in the street, the woman in the street, feels the progress we have made. First of all, I think that it should be about supporting the vulnerable, which we've really worked hard at doing in terms of our social program, Bouquet, where they're looking at the BEAM program. We're looking at cash transfers. We're looking at the grain support program, including the roller mill subsidy, which we've just removed. I think it went some way to assisting people. We know about Matsotsi who are working against us and making money out of it. That's what happens whenever there's subsidy. Some smart guy comes around and then tries to make money, and then they make money. Then eventually we have to move on and do something else. But so we've tried with the social protection program, including from Vodza, including the presidential input scheme, is part of that social protection support program. But let me turn to the specific comment about the pensions issue. We are seized with the matter at two levels. One, there is a Smith Commission report which IPAC is working with the ministry and the industry in trying to resolve, to make sure that there is adequate compensation for that loss in value for pensioners when we moved from the Zimbabwe dollar into the US dollar in 2008, 2009. Then there is also the currency reforms that we've done. We are sensitive to all of that. In the budget, I'm not ready to say it now in public, but in the budget, we'll be able to accommodate it, and I'll be very explicit as to how we'll do it in the budget. In fact, thanks for that question. And also be able to accommodate other areas of loss for ordinary citizens that we've identified as government. But again, I'm not ready to announce, but it's a done deal. We know what we would like to do. We are going to do something about that, so that the men in the street, women in the street, feels that certainly we care about their ability to preserve value going forward and look after themselves once they've retired, which is what a pension does. Then on job creation, linking that to productivity, I agree with you. Production really is the way to go at the end of the day, so that we stop importing what we don't need to import. And as we do that, we create jobs anyway. So really, as government, we again will make sure that we continue to incentivize the productive sector. You know, one exercise that we are doing, we did it a bit last year, but we'll do a more comprehensive job this year, is really to quantify the extent of the rebates that we have extended to the government, to the manufacturing sector. It's a lot. It's a lot of money. Since in the last 10 years, it's a lot. The figure is just being fine-tuned now. Those rebates on imports to the productive sector is a real incentive. And it has enabled the productive sector to, first of all, to maintain jobs, but also to increase jobs, and we'll do more. So just rebates alone without other targeted incentives have been critical. If you look at what we've done with the mining sector, making sure that royalties are tax deductible, that's a big deal. That when a royalty is tax deductible, 15% for diamonds, that's a big deal. It is a major stimulus for production and job creation. But we know the youth are creative, so they've already suggested to me and said, Minister, you know, what you should do is make sure that you remove duty on imports for production processes by the youth. So if a youthful member of our society owns a company and they import something to produce, just because they are youth, we ought to give them a tax rebate. Or it's an interesting one. It makes you think, so we're thinking. So I don't know whether it will make it into the budget or not, but they've already put that forward forcefully, and our teams are looking into it. I'll leave it to Ngorora and PS and others to mull over that and then advise whether we should put it in there or not. Then I think it was Kanyenze, was it? Will I ask the last question about resource leakages in the... Yeah. Is it Godfrey? Or is it a different Kanyenze? Yeah, all right. The resource leakage around gold, this is a source of concern that we have got these people, I think, what are they called? Makoronyera, who go around buying gold from our, especially the small-scale gold producers, and then they export it illicitly. We can't track the revenues directly, you know. So you find that while gold production is in fact going up, the gold deliveries at Fidelity are going down because of this kind of practice. I mean, there are many reasons why this is the case. Of course, part of it has to do with the retention ratios, which we have changed, by the way. We've made sure now that the producer gets more in US dollars. The small-scale producers are being paid in US dollars. So that's part of the trick of trying to compete with these Makoronyera, to make sure that we too offer a good price. But the other is really, there's no substitute for enforcement. You know, we've got a gold mobilization unit at the central bank, which works with the security cluster. And also we had, I think we called it Operation Rubber Boots, so that you can't see us coming. So we had that also in place to make sure that we can enforce and recover our gold. But also, we want to invest in the small-scale gold sector in the first place through these gold centers. Our target is to build 15 gold centers. If you want to see how they work, go to Bobi district just after the, on that Bulawayo Nkai road, just after the airport. On your right, that's where the facility is. It's called the Booby Gold Center. The Minister of Mines invited me there to take a look. That's how really we should support the SME sector for gold. And then that will minimize leakages, because there you've got a crusher, you're a miner, you're assisted with equipment, and then trucks come and take your ore, they take it to the crusher. Middle your ore is crushed, and there's some sense of what value there is in terms of gold in there. You are paid because there's an office right there from the Reserve Bank and Fidelity. So you have an entire ecosystem in that gold center, and want to roll that out to other areas where there's a bit of gold in the Midlands, in Marsh East and so forth. So all that will go a long way in dealing with our gold leakages. But I want to end up by saying this end on gold leakages. At the end of the day, if you're an economist and not worrying about the balance of payment implications of gold leakages, but you're worried about the welfare effects of the gold producers, then it doesn't matter whether there are leakages or not, because the small-scale producer still gets paid US dollars here by Macoronyera, and they spend their money here. That's why you see all that vibrance in the Kwekwe area. I don't know of any city that is open on Sundays except the city of Kwekwe. It is incredible when you drive through there. They've done quite a bit of that. So that just shows you that from a welfare point of view, it's okay. The SMEs are okay, they're receiving their US dollars. But from a balance of payments point of view, we then lose as a country because we can't track those exports adequately. We have a leakage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. The Minister will be leaving at about 9:20, so I am going to throw a lot of questions, just a few more questions than three at the moment. Let me start. This is from our ZTN Facebook page. Thank you for your question. How much has been budgeted for the Youth Bank, i.e. Empowerment Bank? They are the backbone of the country and are accessing limited funding. The bank is not getting adequate funding. And the second question, what steps is the government taking in order to absorb graduating students into the formal economy? And then I would just mention that the question on pensions, Minister, was from Mishek Ugawa. So Mishek, thank you for that.
Yeah,
now some questions for Zoom from Yolanda Millen, following Chapter 17 of the Constitution Amendment number 20, Section 298. How accessible are the financial reports to the public? Reports pertaining to borrowing and resource mobilization in real time. And of course, a very good question, which I'll end up as a last question, unfortunately, is what does government expect from the VFEX, and how will this impact the Zim economy in particular? And I think that, and what plans are there for development of Vic Falls in the 2021 budget? And I think with those questions will end the session. We haven't got a lot of time, unfortunately.
Well, thank you very much, Andy. Thanks for those questions. Do we have more budget, more money for Youth Bank? The answer is yes. I can't give you a figure, but we are going to give them additional resources for them to support the youth. But we want them to really spend that money on giving them loans to the youth, and not perhaps on rolling out branches. I think that they need a model where they work with other institutions that have a branch network. It could be other commercial banks, but also it could be maybe working with POSB. It could even be the post office infrastructure, for example. There's other partnerships that they could craft so that they could increase their reach to youth right across the country. They do not have to roll out their own branches. Rolling out branches is a very expensive business, trust me. But we'll support them in terms of additional resources for them to extend loans to the youth. But also the youth should know that there's also the National Venture Fund, which has got a strong startup element, which will become even stronger in 2021. So work jointly with the Ministry of the Youth, because they've got a youth development fund, jointly with that fund. So the National Venture Fund will fund the National Youth Fund, a development fund, and then from there the youth can then borrow loans, cheap loans, as well as seek equity resources for their businesses. In fact, my preference is equity, not loans. That's what a venture fund should do. If you want debt, you go to a bank. But if you want equity, then you go to a venture fund. And that's the gap that the fund is meant to fill. Then absorbing unemployed graduates. This one is never easy. I can tell you that. Youth unemployment is never easy to deal with, but we need to create the right ecosystems. And it starts with making sure that they are more job ready than before. So it's about the education system, and I'm pleased that as a country, we've moved on to a degree system that includes a year in practice on a job. And so that helps a lot in creating a job readiness and strengthens that education for knowledge aspect of the degree. Even I wish we're structured like that, but we are slightly older Madalas. We went through a more academic system. So that's that. Now, but we need to create the right ecosystems where those who wish to be entrepreneurs then are directed to the National Venture Fund, and those are not the only venture funds, by the way. But as I said, we need an ecosystem where they are taught how to come up with interesting ideas, with a proper business plan, but then they should go through those courses that teach them basic entrepreneurship skills. I used to do this for a living, including employing a psychologist to get into their minds. Not everyone has a business mind. So sometimes you need to reprogram the mind, and I used to employ psychologists to do just that. When someone has been unemployed for 2 years, they need help, even just mental strength. I see my journalist friends are smiling. I'm telling you, that's what you need. So you do that, then eventually you give them some business plan, development skills, and so that they know how to develop a business plan for a bankable project. Once you've done that, then you have to take them into an incubator. So we have various incubators, and we need more. So they are properly incubated, and then through the incubator, then they can access the startup funds for their idea if they want to pursue entrepreneurship. But also we need a mentorship program. We don't have that in place. So we have the older, where's Ruzizo? He's right here. Ruzizo, you must become a mentor. Ruzizo runs a very, you know him, he's president of CZI, so maybe I shouldn't explain who he is. But he's someone who knows the financial industry very well, very well. So mentoring youngsters is critical. Maybe you have 10, 15 that you mentor through the incubator, and every senior businessman does that, the business person does that. It goes a long way in giving them confidence. So we create that ecosystem that starts with acquisition of knowledge for business, changing the mindset. You're supported through access to capital for a good idea. And by the way, even if you do all of that, Andy, with all of that support, you'll find that only 20% of the people succeed. And that's a global statistics. 80% fail. And when that happens, it's normal. Don't get shocked. That's the typical venture capital statistics that we know around the world, the 20-80-80 rule. So things like that, being more systematic about supporting young entrepreneurs, being more systematic about them acquiring knowledge, even for the workplace, will go a long way. But supporting industry to grow, to give them jobs. And I must say, it's not easy, but we have to try and keep trying. Now, only data is data for debt and other financials easily available online on a weekly basis. It's available, but in terms of requirements for reporting, I only have to submit to Parliament twice a year, the debt report and so forth. But look, at any moment we are free to verify as whether the figures that we last reported are still true or not. Anyone is free to come forward. Now the central bank is really able to publish every month. Is it every week? Now, the money supply figures in terms of reserve money and so forth. So those are more easily available now. But really there's no impediment in terms of access to data. In terms of the impact of VFX, the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange, why did we create it? Because we wanted to, we thought as a government, as ministry, that there is no global, let me put it another way, there is no Pan-African stock exchange that has a global cloud that is able to present values of companies in a globally recognizable and consistent way. So we thought, let's create this platform. So Victoria Falls Stock Exchange is a Zimbabwe stock exchange, but the vision is bigger. We want a Pan-African platform for companies to raise capital through that exchange. And they don't have to raise the money from Zimbabwe. You know, that's the thing about global capital. It could be from Australia and so forth. But the listing and quotation is on the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange. It's a global platform based in Africa for raising capital. And we're targeting the mining sector specifically, because that's your typical hard currency sector. They need hard currency equipment, which can be only bought in hard currency. Even the insurance has to be in hard currency. That's a hard currency sector. And the minerals also in hard currency. So that's our typical target for VFEX. And Southern Africa's natural endowment is in the mineral resources, frankly. We have all the 40 most valuable minerals here in Zimbabwe. DRC has a serious reserve of minerals. Same applies to South Africa. Of course, we would compete with South Africa naturally because the JSE is quite a serious platform. There's Mozambique, there's Namibia, there's Zambia, Malawi. So just Southern Africa alone is a strong mining region, and we want to target all of it through VFEX. We want these mining companies to list on the Victoria Falls Stock Exchange. You asked me about a broader development plan for Victoria Falls. Yes, there is one, which is being fine-tuned. It is being led by the Minister of Local Government. That's where it sits. I've seen some draft of it. It's very impressive, very, very impressive indeed. If we're able to, over the next few years, to realize every target in there, it will really transform the tourism sector in that area. But also in the country at large. Yes, there is a master plan and a development plan. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I've actually been asked, Minister, to take a few questions from the floor, if that's okay. No
questions from the floor.
There's no more questions from the floor. I'm sure there is. I think the CZI president may have a question. I'm not sure. But I would like to acknowledge as well, which is interesting, Minister, on the Zoom platform, Zimbabwe Embassy in Addis Ababa. Dee Matemba, thank you for an insightful presentation. So the live streaming on Zoom and also through our Facebook page at Zim Papers TV Network is reaching a wide audience of Zimbabweans around the globe.
Fabulous.
Henry, do you have a question? Or hang on.
Okay. I wanted to check if we're going to have the plenary or we ask the questions to the minister now.
Go ahead.
Okay, Minister, maybe just some comments from industry.
Oh, thank you.
First of all, you did mention about macroeconomic stability, about currency stability. We believe those are the biggest ingredients for success of the economy and cannot be overemphasized enough. So please, I think when the budget is actually done, we really need to spend some time on what's going to happen to inflation, what's going to happen to the currency. One of the biggest, at the moment, the paradigm in economic development says know-how is the biggest asset that any nation can have for success. Now, we have know-how in our value chains. We have know-how in our diaspora community. I think we need to find a way of harnessing that knowledge and build on that knowledge to develop our economy. I think an attitude that says we must not lose any more value chain players in the country might be a good starting point, because that knowledge is very important. Economic enablers. Here we're talking about electricity, in particular fuel, and foreign currency. I think we have noticed what has happened not post-COVID, but as we recover from COVID, the fact that we have had some kind of stability in...
Okay, go ahead. I can hear.
All right. Some kind of stability in, companies accessing foreign currency through, the auction system. We've actually seen that product availability has been improving. performance of businesses has been improving, and we really need to continue to make foreign currency available through formal systems as opposed to what was obtaining maybe in 2019. And then I think, Minister, to really welcome the thrust of the strategy, which is equitable shared growth. I think we welcome that. Resuscitation of distressed sections of the economy, I think, is quite welcome. And the thrust to reinvigorate industry and to strengthen and develop value chains is quite aligned to the strategies we've been discussing as industry ourselves. We will send, after we go through the paper in detail, our proposals as industry direct to the ministry for input into the budget. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I think that's colleagues, that's clear enough. I couldn't agree with you more, Mr. Ruzizo, that really macro stability is critical. Once you get that, you create a sense of certainty and direction. It enables businesses to plan, to invest, and to see exactly where they're going. So I couldn't agree with you more. Now, the issue about harnessing skills, network, and resources from our diaspora, making sure that know-how is harnessed the right way. Again, I agree with you, and in the budget, in the pre-budget statement, we say that. So we need to really sharpen our diaspora policy and strategy to make sure they can play their part. And we shouldn't lose any players within any value chain, because once we lose that, then to replace it will take a while. And you're right that the enablers are critical. Power, water, whatever it is, making sure that we invest enough in including the availability of foreign currency through the formal systems, the auction systems. We are going to continue to support the auction system. It's brought stability, and I hope that all of you now are beginning to source your foreign currency in between auctions as well, which is what you ought to do with your banks. We want more of that to happen, so that the auction, yes, is there. It may not supply all the forex naturally, but in between the prices out of the auction are then a reference point in terms of pricing of the forex that you source from banks. So I agree with you, and I look forward to further input from industry. We always get very good ideas from CZI and other industry players.
Thank you very much. I think that comes to the end of the question and answer session. And sorry, Henry, as you said, plenary session. And thank you for that from Confederation of Zimbabwe Industry. Some very pertinent points there. And I am going to talk on behalf of the ministry. I hope, Minister, that your communication department will be able to answer some of the questions that are pouring in on the platforms. So maybe I can ask the Ministry of Finance officials to maybe try and answer some of the questions in the spirit of engagement with citizens. So I am going to now call up Mr. Ngorora. He's Chief Director of Economic Affairs for closing remarks and vote of thanks. And if I can add that, Mr. Ngorora, please, if you can make it brief, because the Minister does have to go. Thank you very much. Please, a hand of applause for Mr. Ngorora.
Thank you, Master of Ceremonies. Honorable Minister, Deputy Chief Secretary, Permanent Secretaries here present, invited guests, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the ministry, I wish to thank you most sincerely for participating at this launch of the 2021 Budget Strategy paper, which is titled Building Resilience and Economic Recovery Post-COVID. Honorable Minister and Secretary, we want to thank you for the policy guidance and advice you continue to give to your technical team. It makes our technical work much easier. I will not attempt to summarize the discussions this morning because of time, and also because we are recording the discussions and also the contributions coming in from the various players. In the ministry, we are going to review all these contributions and also undertake the difficult task of balancing all the competing interests that are coming in from the various stakeholders. In this regard, we are, even under COVID, going to continue with the traditional engagement that we normally undertake as we prepare for the national budget using some of the various instruments that are available. The minister unfortunately didn't tell the timeline for the presentation, but I must add that time is very small and it's critical that stakeholders, please make sure you make your contributions as soon as possible so that you allow us time to review and also reflect on the contributions. With that, I want to thank you most sincerely for participating, and good morning.
That's it. Thank you very much. I think the Minister has to go now. We have come to the end of this session, the launch of the 2021 pre-budget strategy paper here from Rainbow Towers. And of course, we have been streaming live on Zim Paper's TV network ZTN platforms, and that's at Zim Paper's TV network on Facebook. Of course, our Twitter handle at ZTN News, and of course, blessing our YouTube on at ZTN. Well, it's a very interesting debate that was there. I think it set the groundwork for more inclusive dialogue, stakeholder participation in what's happening in the country.
Most definitely, Andy. A lot of expectations coming out of this pre-strategy meeting. Just like we heard in the closing remarks, it's still open for consideration on some of the issues coming in from the stakeholders to actually impact into the final budget so that we can have that productivity going up.
Well, that's it, as I said, for this morning from the Rainbow Towers, of course, streaming live on Zim Paper's TV network platforms. So all I have to say from me, I'm Andy Hodges, and...
Blessing Munatsi.
And goodbye, and you all be safe.